Welcome. Thanks for dropping by. I am Marina Orms, and I'm the founder of Astrology Heals at astrologyheals.com, talking to some women badasses. And I have a special badass with me today who is an Aries sun, and her name is Angela Wieland. So thanks for being here, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, so Angela is, she's a hypnotherapist, a life coach, a toe reader, and she's based in Mexico, but she does do remote sessions. And her website is sayulitaclarity.com. So that's SAYULITA-clarity with a C.com. And we'll put that in the comments as well. So thanks for being here and sharing your badass self with us. So, yeah. So tell me a little bit about what makes you a badass.
Well, I would say, generally speaking, I am very Aries in the fact that I am a natural leader. I definitely like to be in the lead. I tend to be a trendsetter. I tend to be quite pioneering in my approach. If I set my mind to something, I get it done. I'm very ambitious.
And you've accomplished some things in your life. You have a business and you are making a difference for clients.
Mm-hmm. I am, although I will say that in typical Aries fashion, which we're known to kind of jump from one thing to the next, oftentimes not seeing things through, in standard fashion, I have had a very varied career. I started out in finance. I've also been a professional photographer. I've been a vintage clothing and antiques dealer. I've done journalist work. I sell real estate. So there's many things, but yes.
So part of your path to being a badass is experiencing different things and figuring out what works for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also just kind of gathering clues in what feels good. And what I've learned is that just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean that you're meant to do that in terms of a line of work, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's been something that has been challenging to really, in the past it was I had some good jobs, but in my heart I knew that they were not a good fit for me. For one reason or another. And so just with the wisdom that life affords and a lot of personal development, I have come to realize that, really what makes you happy and what provides joy is very varied for everyone, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and Aries is a fire sign, so it is known for being proactive and having courage and taking risks. Mm-hmm. And so there's probably good and bad that goes with that. And can you speak a little bit to what it looks like when it doesn't go well and what it looks like when it does go well?
Well, I would say yes. I would say I kind of alluded to that. I think a common Aries issue, or specifically with me, is I have a lot of ideas and it's easy to start going in many different directions. And then the downside of that, though, is you lose interest because patience is not a strong Aries virtue. So either you get frustrated and you don't see things through, or you just get distracted and there's something else that seems more appealing. So I think that's something is really kind of I've had to learn to rein myself in and really prioritize, okay, you can't do everything. And what is really at the end of the day going to give you the most satisfaction. So, that's one challenge I would say with being Aries. I think also just the impulsivity of it is, I do have, because as I mentioned to you privately, I have a Virgo rising. So that helps me with some structure and somewhat of an organizational ability. but I think that there still is this fly by the seat of the pants kind of tendency that, which is what prompted me to by myself. I left, I moved to New York City knowing no one. I lived there for 9 years. And then I moved to Mexico by myself, knowing no one. I drove cross country several times by myself. So there's a sense of adventure, this impetuousness, this impulsiveness, love for adventure. But I think a struggle for Aries sometimes is to be grounded.
Yeah.
That can be challenging, is to really look at the repercussions of your actions in advance, if possible. Even in terms of your speaking, right? It's like I have a tendency, I have no problem speaking my mind. And that can be a good thing. That's what makes me a leader and I think draws people to me. But it also can be, if I'm not careful, I can offend people. Or I have been told more than one time in my life, you know, you're so intense. And I thought, well, what's wrong with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that's one of the things I find is that, especially with Aries women, that there's sort of a cultural norm or a cultural expectation that you'll be quiet, right? Or less direct or more obtuse. And so with that Aries energy coming through you, it is very direct, and it can be disarming for people sometimes. But it's powerful ultimately when you find ways to be yourself and embody and live that directness and that, you called it impulsivity, but it's also like, a willingness to take action. And yeah, and that, as with the other people I've been interviewing too, everyone sort of has this version of how do I balance, the negative side of what my sign is in ways that are going to help me take advantage of the positive side of it. And so being such a healing path for all of us. Yeah. So you mentioned leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about what that, how the Aries helps you be a leader?
well, I think that, like I said, I just naturally have a tendency to want to take charge. So when I was younger, for example, in school, I didn't like to be part of groups because I always felt like somebody would bring the group down, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was a tendency to want to, yeah, it could be a little bossy or a little bit pushy, controlling. But I think, and what's interesting is I would say that early in my career, I gravitated and worked in very male-dominated industries. And I tended to compete more in a career level with men. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an aspect of most Aries women's personality. There's a very masculine component to my personality, which can be, as you said, disarming for people, especially men, when they're not really used to dealing with such a forthright person that will speak their mind. That's been challenging. But for me, in terms of getting back to your original question, I am the type of person that whenever I set my mind to do something, I will do it. And so I got an idea in my head after I did some finance stuff that I wanted to go more into the corporate, and I became a corporate buyer. I was promoted in half the time. Most of my career, when I was working in a corporation or for somebody else, I was always promoted in half the time. And I think that was because I also am not afraid to be in front of others. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily the best public speaker, but I don't mind, I guess, stating what I do think are the good things that I'm doing. So I don't know. I think as far as like leadership too, I always had a very quirky sense of, for example, fashion. I loved art. I loved those kind of things. And when I was younger, I took a lot of criticism, I would say, for the way that I would present myself as very unconventional. But for me, there was always this kind of, I don't want to say contrarian, but I was very happy and content to go against the grain, to go against the norm, and to, for me, that was the sense of leadership that really exposed itself early, was more in my appearance and what I chose to wear, and to, quite frankly, not give a shit that other people didn't get it or even thought it was ugly or whatever it was.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And I think the world needs more women who have that kind of confidence. And do you ever find that you second guess it afterwards?
Well, I think at this point in my life, I have been more selective in terms of how, I guess, more mindful of how I'm coming across, whether that's what I'm saying, what I'm wearing. I'm also not a kid, so I've obviously kind of evolved in terms of my presentation. But yes, I think that that's something I've really kind of worked on, is filtering, especially when it comes to how I'm coming across, and that the boldness and the directness and the outspokenness, knowing when that's appropriate and when it's actually counterproductive and may actually get in the way.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. And so using it in the most, through mindfulness, like you said, and awareness, being able to choose that Aries quality can come through in positive and beneficial ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. And you mentioned that you have Virgo rising, and what's your moon sign?
Pisces.
Pisces. Okay. So yeah, so you have some balance there. 3 different elements. Yeah.
And the Pisces is what has really kind of, I always like to call it my witchy side, but the thing that's really drawn me into astrology and tarot and metaphysical studies, and that was present very early on, I would say from the time I was 5 or 6, and I had no real influence for that around me. So it was definitely a very strong pull, but I think that's what really helps me in the healing work that I do. But I think that also the directness of the Aries and being able to be compassionate, but also being able to kind of call people out in a nice way. And of course, I hold space for them, but sometimes people need to be, for lack of a better word, confronted, and to just, and I think that can be helpful. And I've noticed that my approach in my therapy work has really evolved to be more proactive, but it also has been a great opportunity for me to practice my listening skills, because as an Aries, I am very talkative. And I think that's one of the things that most people that know me think of me, is like, I can always have something to say. Very social, but I can also be kind of quiet. Maybe that's the Virgo.
Well, I like what you're saying about the badassness of being able to speak to what's happening. And I would say that's probably, one of the biggest badass qualities of Aries is putting stuff on the table, like you said, a little bit confronting, but it maybe needs to come out. It maybe needs, so that's the, that gets balanced, of course, with the other signs and the other qualities, but, we have all 12 archetypes of the zodiac signs. So we've got all of them in all of us, but some of us, express particular ones more than others. And so you get to be the representative of that archetype, to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. And I think that really reflects a kind of badassness that brings the greater good to the whole.
Well, I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I would say generally I'm the kind of person that if I have an issue with something, or if I do think something needs to be said, just on a personal basis or within a business framework, whatever it may be, relating to whatever, I will say it. I will, at this point, as I get older, I will try to be as diplomatic as possible, but I will definitely call it out.
Yeah.
And so, depending on who you're dealing with, that may be well received or not. But I've just learned to be more selective, and like I said, just with the choice of words and how it's delivered.
Yeah. Cool.
So you can say the same thing in different ways, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, awesome. So do you have any advice for other Aries women who are stepping into their badassness?
Well, I would say a real challenge for me has been, honestly, kind of embracing more of the feminine aspects of my personality. And so what I've really been working on is trying to be more receptive, to be more allowing, instead of just pushing and directing. And I think that that's been a big lesson for me, is that not everything gets done by how hard you push. Sometimes you need to give pause and allow things to work, the magic to happen or not.
Yeah.
Right. And some things aren't meant to happen. So I think that is a big lesson for me. And I mentioned earlier, kind of learning to go with the flow, and sort of this Aries are very impatient. We want it now. We want it yesterday. And so to kind of, if it's something that you really have decided that is a priority or a goal, to really give it the space and the nurturance that it needs to come into fruition. So I would say to become more of a watcher. And I think the more educated you are as to some of your own tendencies, the more that you can stop self-sabotaging and stepping on your own feet. Mm-hmm. So those are some things that are kind of coming to mind. And then I guess another thing is just with the boldness and the directness is maybe being aware, putting yourself in the other person's position as to, if that was delivered to you, how would that sound? Or even if it would be okay to you, that to keep in mind that everybody is different. And so, yeah, to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm chuckling a little bit because I just interviewed a Libra sun, and she was saying the opposite, that, I need to learn how to be more bold and more assertive, and temper my peacemaking skills with that. So it's interesting how we have the opposite sign is also kind of the medicine. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. And Libra, of course, being more diplomatic, right? And the listening skills, and yeah.
Well, Libra being the sign of partnership, Aries being the sign of ego. So I think that's another thing as I've gotten older. I mean, there's so much now in the media about, being aware of your ego. Well, Aries, we have it. Everybody has an ego that they need to manage. But Aries, we are the sign of ego. So we are the sign of me first. There's this, selfish kind of do it my way or get out of the way. And so I think that is a big challenge for Aries, is to really be especially mindful of those tendencies that as much as you think it is all about you, it's not all about you, and so that has been particularly challenging. I think that for me, so, when I was younger as a child, I was told by one of my grade school teachers, told my parents that I was demanding more than my share of attention. And I remember that really kind of hurt my feelings, because there is a sensitivity there too. But I think that as I've gotten older is just that you have to be mindful of others, right? And really me wanting the attention was not about putting on a show. It was about a lot of questions and just but I was monopolizing the classroom time because I kept asking so many questions, whereas other people probably had questions too.
Right.
So I think it's just that really being and teaching mindfulness is just really being aware of how you come across.
Yeah.
Not that it's good or bad, but just to
Yeah.
be aware of it.
Totally. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you. I think we need to wrap up, but thank you so much for sharing, and very insightful, I think, and very helpful to get the Aries perspective.
Well, thank you. I'm sure there's some things I forgot, but
Probably.
I hope you got the gist of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see
Bye.
you next time.